Hello, welcome to part two of my Easter special on autism, where we're going into more depth about the condition and things that people can practically do about it. I was just speaking about how dictionaries are quite limited in that they have to select common synonyms or words with similar meanings, and they're very limited when people use a lot of technical language, a lot of informal language, a lot of abbreviated language. But we'll go on to that as we come on. Now, now, if when you rely on literal interpretations, looking at meanings at face value can give you a very unclear picture, and philosophy is developed out of much more considered thought, much more reflective wisdom, and even though it's not a natural ability for autistics, I believe it could help people a great deal, which is why I provide philosophy resources on the channel. Um, but you see, prima facie, to give you a philosophical word or two words, um, is basically means that at first impressions or at first sight. And that's how we judge with literal interpretations. It's our initial impulse that we have to resist. Um, the next two things we're going on to are analogy and metaphor. And now, there are two things that are about objects or subjects for which are the same only in comparison of certain respects. And they do have some things in common, but metaphors are often a lot far away from literal definitions. And if you look out for words like or merely just is, which can be short for is like, you can detect similes and metaphors as opposed to more literal accessible words. Now, phonetic sounds um, are first based on our unreflective ideas of words and can be misleading. But even worse, conflation and ambiguity. Conflation is putting two things together that shouldn't go, but you're confusing them together. And ambiguity is just riddled through the whole of the universe and man's wisdom and life, and it can be an awful thing for autistic people to they might say to themselves, why do they bother, if the world's this obstacle course that they're not geared up and trained to do. um, but it's putting two things together wrongly, like we had the example of a cat and a pillar. That is an example of conflation. And now common meanings differ in 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 dictionary terms and in common use from in other uses. So a caterpillar would not be similar to a type of column, a Doric column, or a type of pillar. A caterpillar is, I think, it comes from the metaphor of it looking like a pillar, but not actually being related to either a column or a cat, a kind of column of segments maybe, but not a column of stone, and therefore you can see how metaphors and similes can complicate a kind of the urge to literally understand everything. But do not rely on sounds is my advice. It's only one way of approaching words, and to not look for the most accessible way is often how you start to unlock the code of language. Um, with specialized meanings, new words, metaphors, and ambiguity sewn through the whole thing, which is a terrible thing. But if you can resist the impulse to judge and to react, and you can say to yourself, this is your autism, if you feel confused or unsure at all. Very often you've got a very good reason to feel unsure because there are things about it that are confusing and ambiguous. But if you assume something's one thing or another, like assuming that something's either your fault or somebody else's fault, you don't see the ambiguities in life that it can be nobody's fault. it's more to do with responsibility and learning responsibility than fault anyway. We can't change the past, and ultimately, I believe God is our judge. Um, but ambiguity is in everything. For example, in metaphysics, in philosophy, it's referred to as indeterminism. But if you try to look at this literally, you might say, well, is it to do with being a determined person or diligent? But it comes from determinate, something that persists or stays the same. And therefore, indeterminate is something that doesn't persist or stay the same, something in between. Therefore, the in would come perhaps from in between. It's easy to assume, and dictionaries' common definitions can be pretty redundant when you've got like thousands of entries and the book's that big. But but the world is different from dictionaries anyway. It's chaotically abbreviated, and for autism, it can be a nightmare of confusion. Um, the last thing we get to is rhetoric. Now, the problem autistics have is reading between the lines, and rhetoric is a way of speaking like Hamlet would speak, to be or not to be. It's a way of phrasing where you're not asking for a response, but you're also implying things that are beyond what you say. And therefore, to be rhetorical is to often insinuate or imply connotations or extra things, baggage that you're not actually saying in the sentence. And this can be a nightmare for autistics because you're trying to literally read everything. There's nothing to literally read. No words that are thine. So what is but so it comes down to is what is unsaid and what is implied. And people pick these things up from context. Context is the important thing. If you can think about a context, that's where your hook comes from. Thinking back about, the context in which things have arisen, rather than directly looking for a key that goes in the door of the word, to think about in a broader sense, in a lateral sense, if you like, not perhaps as something that autistics find easy in a kind of sideways way of thinking about things generally rather than focusing in and trying to ascertain and get your hooks there. And if you don't know what something means, just admit it. You don't have to know. And the more you try and make sense out of something that doesn't make sense to you, you're not being fair on yourself and you will get angry with yourself. You've just got to say, look, some things you don't know and you need to find out. No, the Serenity Prayer says, change the things that you can change, accept the things that you can't, and have the wisdom to know the difference. And this applies to language. Right. Now, the superego, which is something we covered earlier, the conscience or the programmed parent in you that is what they call a censor or like an authority over your ego that has obviously lost control in many cases of autism. Now, we learn our guidance from our parents and parent figures, and it becomes like a bit like an automatic parent figure. You become the censor of yourself. You become the parent training your behavior. And for information on becoming your own parent, I've got a mix on addiction with ambient music that starts with a band called Chicane on The Cat with No Teeth. It's addiction support. There's more addiction support, substance support from Russell Brand and so forth, and 12 steps. But my own addiction support mix, I speak about becoming a mother, protecting and caring for yourself in life, becoming an autonomous parent to do with tackling smoking and other addictions. Now, you need to become your own parent because, you know, parents aren't there forever. And, we have to become more autonomous and more independent is what we need to aim at and to let real life in. And that's what I try and do on my channel it's real life therapy that's been turned into therapy, music therapy, wisdom therapy, etc. Right. Now, the ego affects our superego and stops it functioning properly. Now, autism is a kind of state of half confusion that comes down the female line. I spoke about this in my previous video, the first video on autism, where Eve is both innocent and guilty at the same time. And that's an early biblical description of autism, because Eve is both the innocence of the learning disorder and the guilt of the responsibility that's caused by that naivety. And now, self-deception and being vulnerable to others deceiving ourselves, especially manipulative autistic people. I wrote a song called World of the Half Confused that you might like. It's about autism. It's on my early albums. And the lyrics go, in a world that's half confused, what else should I be? Because I'm saying, well, I'm not autistic, but I'm just as confused in a different way. And the lyrics go, fighting ignorance and lack of self-empathy. So you can see it's confronting, what the autistic's challenges are. And then it says to be or not to be, like Hamlet. It's your imperative. It's your life. And you might like it to do with but the course in philosophy is designed to be therapeutic. And even if you feel it too challenging at first, you've got to listen to it more than once, and you've got to have a piece of paper, take it at your own pace, write your own notes how you feel, and then go back and read them. Read them after you've listened to it again. Read your notes after and you'll see the sense, and you'll see the things that you missed out. Now, philosophy is to do with knowledge and wisdom of the self, and therefore to help egocentricity and problems associated with learning disorders and ability-based learning disorders. Philosophy deals with both the self and the meta-self, the third person, or the builder of the house, as it were, in the case of the id. So philosophy is very important, I believe, my personal opinion and argument, in helping autistic people. Now, words. Now, we dealt with words in one of the other lectures, and I felt that was a little bit incomplete because I spoke about spider diagrams. So what I've done is I've actually drawn a spider diagram to show you very briefly more to do with the method I meant. Last time I used the word fact, but I did it so briefly. I wanted to show you more because with a spider diagram, or sometimes called a brainstorm, you can think of every different meaning or association with a word that you can make. And then you can see the differences between different senses of the word, different connotations, different situations, meanings. And here's the example I've drawn. So can you see it? So of the word cat. Now, cat is what's at the center of the spider diagram, and the legs that come off it, I've got animal as opposed to human. Pet, because we had pet cats growing up and I was a pet carer. No teeth, DJ, that's me. Bit of a plug. The woman off Batman, Catwoman. A cat burglar of skill like a cat. But you can see how all the words relate to cat differently. Or cat boots, which are more related to caterpillar, an abbreviation. Or a cat, a platonic friend, as opposed to a girlfriend or a colleague at school. Somebody in your private world. So not only somebody that you have as an animal, but somebody that you like a bit like a friend. And we've got cat's eyes on the road. Cat as a pet carer. So it's being a pet carer I associate with cat caring. And what's this? Tracks on a tank, caterpillar tracks. So there's a spider diagram I've drawn, and you can see how you can break a diagram, you can break a word down into all the different ideas that you've got, and you can organize those ideas. And that's what really can help autistic people, is to organize broken down ideas. Right. Right, sorry. And therefore, that's it, I'm afraid. Sorry, thought there was more. But therefore, autism I diagnose as a Freudian dysfunction, and there are other conditions that relate to it. And if you're interested, they're in the first lecture to do with autism, and there are more techniques to help with autism, or in the second lecture to do with autism. So that's part 2, and enjoy the world of the half confused. Thank you.